What a headshot! What a head!
How's it, guys? This is Dayvy, FPL, and welcome back to the Fantasy Premier League video here on my channel. Now in this video, I'll be taking you guys through the ultimate guide or the ultimate free hit guide to the upcoming blank game week 32. So I decided to combine the free hit guide with the ultimate guide for this specific game week, as I know a lot of us are on the chip, including myself, and therefore what better way to get the best insight than to address the chip directly. But don't worry, the ultimate guide is still going to say the same. We're going to go over the stats review to start off the video, then move into the captaincy at the end of the video. But between that, I've got a whole bunch of free hit topics. Those include kind of going over the best differentials from a defender, midfielder, and forward point of view, and also discussing talking points such as which Liverpool triple up to go for. Now there might be a ton of talking points still to take place, so don't worry, in the team selection coming up tomorrow, I might go over those, but if I do miss them, or you're scared I'm going to miss them tomorrow, drop them in the comments down below on my Discord server, where I'm slightly more active. So this video is going to be relevant to those of you on the free hit definitely, but for those of you off the free hit, still might be good for those free transfers to get the best players in. So that's something you guys are interested in? Sit back, relax, and let's get straight into it. So starting off the ultimate guide or the free hit guide like we usually do, I'll be going over the stats review from an attacking and a defensive point of view. Now I have actually switched things up a little bit. I've changed two factors from our usual stats review. The first one is going to be the left hand side, isn't going to be the entire season as a whole. It's actually going to be since the restart, which was around game week 17, obviously after the World Cup. So that's one thing that has changed. The second thing is because this is going to be kind of for a blank game week, I've eliminated all the teams that have a blank fixture in game week 32. Man City, United, Chelsea and Brighton have been removed, as to be honest, all of those teams have pretty good stats, so taking them off the rankings was quite helpful for those free hit decisions. Other than that though, it's exactly the same as usual on the left hand side as mentioned since the restart. On the right hand side, the last 6 game weeks at a minimum. I went for 6 game weeks at a minimum because of the blanks, because of the doubles. Some teams have played more fixtures when using a game week filter. But don't worry, I'll talk you guys through it and I think it's going to make a lot more sense when I go over the actual talking point. So let's go over the attacking stats, and the stat of choice is XG non-penalty. Now you guys know I like to go for the non-penalty variant. Penalties are quite hard to predict, and that's why from an attacking point of view I don't want to rely on them, so that's why I've gone for the non-penalty variant. So on the left hand side, since the restart, so from game week 17 to game week 31, we see Liverpool up top with 1.85. Now these stats are also per game, and therefore Liverpool have an XG non-penalty of 1.85 on average since the restart. Second team is going to be Arsenal. We then have Newcastle, Brentford, Aston Villa and Bournemouth. So definitely Liverpool and Arsenal I'll be targeting from an attacking point of view. And is it worth actually going for a double up from those attacking options? Newcastle might be a team under the radar, however they do have a little bit of a tougher game against Spurs in game week 32. We then have Brentford, Aston Villa and Bournemouth. All of these assets are in our free hit drafts at the current moment, so that's nice to see. Then go on to the right hand side, so the last 6 games at a minimum. Some of these teams have played up to 9 fixtures, but Liverpool have stayed consistent at 1.85. We then have Arsenal up next with 1.8, so definitely from an attacking point of view, these two sides are a cut above the rest, which may be a little bit expected. We then have Newcastle, Bournemouth, Aston Villa and Everton, so Everton creeping up there. So if you guys are considering going for maybe a Crystal Palace defender, just be cautious because Everton's XG non-penalty has actually improved over the last 6 game weeks. Newcastle yet again showing that they have great attacking stats, so maybe an Isaac could be a shout, but Bournemouth and Aston Villa are going to be where it's at from our own personal forwards. So you guys can kind of pause this, but we'll be reflecting on it later on when we go on to some decisions. But in the team selection tomorrow, I'll probably be referencing these XG stats quite a bit. Main takeaway here is probably the fact that Liverpool and Arsenal have a great XG non-penalty, so doubling up on that attack might actually be worth it than going for 2 other defenders. Otherwise, what I'll also add is that Solanke from Bournemouth might be a shout to go for with their good XG non-penalty stats. But now that we've looked at the kind of best teams, let's now look at the worst teams, and these are going to be teams to target from a defensive point of view. For example, let's bring up the left hand side. Since the restart, Southampton have the worst XG non-penalty on average in the Premier League. So if you guys look at an Arsenal defender, we've just seen their attacking stats look pretty strong, but they are facing the worst attack in the Prem at the moment. So double up on their defense might not be that shabby. So 0.71 for Southampton on average, that's their XG non-penalty per game, followed up by Nottingham Forest, Fulham, Wolves, Crystal Palace and finally Leeds. So your top 2 teams there, this is why this free hit is so kind of annoying, is the fact that the 2 top attacks have the 2 best fixtures from a defensive point of view. So where do you kind of split your 3? So I've just said maybe go for 2 attackers from Arsenal and Liverpool, maybe now go for 2 defenders because from an XG non-penalty point of view, their opposition are pretty bad. We then have Fulham and Leeds both here, so that game could be quite a low scoring one, but otherwise your Leicester defenders against Wolves might be a shout. Finally, we've just seen the reverse of Everton's XG non-penalty looking pretty strong. Maybe an Everton defender is a better shout than a Crystal Palace one when you guys look at these stats. But I'll be going over the right hand side now. So over the last 6 game weeks at a minimum, we see Southampton, Nottingham Forest constantly being the worst attacks, followed by Wolves, Leicester, Fulham, and then finally Leeds. So Crystal Palace have improved as you would have seen under Roy Hodgson. Just remember the fact that Crystal Palace over the last 6 have had a new manager, so maybe don't go for one of those Everton defenders. But there might be some differential defenses to go for here. As I mentioned, the Leicester defense could be a shout. But to be honest, besides maybe the Liverpool and Arsenal games from a defensive point of view, there aren't that many nice fixtures to actually target. But now that we have done the attacking stat, let's go over our defensive stat, and the stat of choice is going to be XG conceded. This does include penalties. Now you might be asking why exclude penalties from an attacking point of view, but include them from a defensive point of view, but I just kind of feel like if a defense is conceding a lot of penalties, we should take that into account. So on the left hand side, since the restart, Newcastle have the best defense in the Prem at the moment with 1.04, excluding the kind of teams that blank in Game Week 32. Then followed up by Brentford, Crystal Palace, Spurs, Southampton, and then finally Arsenal. So Brentford's an interesting one because a lot of us do own those Aston Villa assets, but might this be a tougher game for Aston Villa than it is for Brentford? We then have Crystal Palace, Spurs, Southampton, and then finally Arsenal. So like I mentioned with that Crystal Palace game, under Roy Hodgson, if they're still looking good from a defensive point of view, that's probably the other defense we're going for. Spurs also interesting to see, but against Newcastle, that game might be quite tough. And then quite interesting to see that Southampton are also here above Arsenal, as most of us are going for those Arsenal defenders versus the Southampton ones. But I guess there's going to be no debate there. This is one of those stats that I think we will probably ignore, because I can't say that anyone's going to go for a Southampton defender over an Arsenal one. Then on the right hand side, over the last 6 game weeks, we have seen Crystal Palace improve from an XG conceded point of view, and they're currently the best defense at 0.94. So we should be safe with a Johnson in defense. We could go for a Gay and Anderson. I'll mention them a little bit later on, but they might be the differential defense to go for as our third defender. We're going to have Aston Villa, Newcastle, Spurs, Liverpool, and then finally Leicester. So Arsenal nowhere to be seen here, but that's expected after their recent drop-off from a defensive point of view. But looking good for Liverpool from an XG conceded point of view, a Robertson, a Trent, a Van Dijk can all be there. And it's nice to see that Newcastle are here with Trippier. The final point to talk about is going to be that Aston Villa defense. Alex Moreno looks like a good shout to go for, but I guess the Aston Villa fixture has been quite easy over the last 6. Now moving on to the worst defenses, so these are teams to target from an attacking point of view, so target teams that are facing this opposition as there should be goals in store for them. On the left hand side, the worst defense in the Prem has been Bournemouth, 1.85 XG conceded since the restart, followed by Everton, Nottingham Forest, Leeds, Leicester, and Fulham. Now in terms of Everton, yes, Sean Dyche has kind of taken over, hasn't played that many games, but it's been enough for me. And the fact is Everton's defense hasn't looked that great. I'm going to bring up the right hand side because it supports that argument. We see they have the worst defense over the last 6 games at a minimum with 2.01, followed closely by Fulham. So your Leeds assets, if you can kind of target a Leeds opponent that will play the majority of minutes, they could have some fun against this Fulham side. But Crystal Palace is where I'll be looking at for differentials because, as I mentioned, Everton's defense is simply terrible and they are away from home. Other than that though, Nottingham Forest, Southampton, Leeds and West Ham, so Nottingham Forest and Southampton, very much a target for us Liverpool and Arsenal owners, but Bowen could be a nice differential with all this extra conceded by Bournemouth. But going over these defensive stats definitely kind of reiterates the fact that these are great games for Liverpool and Arsenal. We have some outside punts for Crystal Palace, their attackers, their defenders could be quite nice, and then we have a side like a Bournemouth with pretty good XG, but not great XG conceded. But unfortunately the stats will make these kind of transfer decisions or free decisions even easier because they're saying the Crystal Palace defense looks strong, the Crystal Palace attack looks strong, but the Liverpool attack and defense both look good, so how do you split your triple up? But if you guys do want to go through these stats, maybe change the game week ranks, you can all do that. Go over to Fantasy Football Fix and go to their Optus Stats sandbox. Now talking about kind of the Liverpool and Arsenal assets and how to split them, I want to talk about the Liverpool assets firstly because I do think this debate is slightly tougher than the Arsenal one. In terms of the Arsenal defenders, I think they're great. I think their upside is fine. A Gabriel, a Ben White are probably the ones to look at, but they don't all offer that much attacking threat. So in my opinion, I think going for the Arsenal attack is slightly easier, especially if we do get early team news about who's going to start on Friday evening. But the tougher debate to go over is which Liverpool assets to go for. Currently, I do think Trent and Salah are locked in. If you guys want to go for another differential, you could also do that, but generally most people are going for Trent and Salah. So the final 2 options I want to talk about are going to be Robertson and Gakpo. Now yes, there are other assets to go for, a Van Dijk, but in my opinion, Van Dijk versus Robertson is pretty close. I think as long as both start that fixture against Nottingham Forest, there's not much in between them. Yes, Virgil is on their set pieces, but Robertson still gets forward, even under this new system with Trent in midfield. Now in terms of Gakpo, you could go for a Diego Jota, but I do think those forward spots are quite hotly contested, and that's why I do prefer the Dutchman in midfield. Now you guys will see the stat on screen there is going to be the projected points for blank game week 32 from Fix, and you guys can see it's super close. Robertson on 5.5 and Gakpo on 5.3. Now having looked at the stats, you guys will see that the attack definitely is better for Liverpool than the defense, but in terms of Nottingham Forest attack, they're not great and I can see a clean sheet in this one. Now what I will say is I do think the upside for Liverpool is significantly more than the defensive options, and that's why I do prefer Gakpo to Robertson at the current moment. But the problem lies in the fact that, as we mentioned with the XG conceded, there's not many defenses to actually target, and that's why having 2 Liverpool defenders makes your team have a better structure. You can then start in an Eze, you can start in a Maddison instead of a Gakpo, and then your back 3 is probably 2 Liverpool and then Trippier. So for me, it's a debate about upside versus kind of team or overall structure, as the defensive options aren't great this week, but there's a ton of midfield options or attacking options. But what I will say on paper right now is I think it might be worth taking that kind of differential punt, going for a Gakpo in midfield, as I do believe the attack of Liverpool has a higher upside than the defense. They just seem to be conceding the odd chance, even from a defensive mistake. I can almost see Liverpool winning this one by quite a few goals, but still conceding. What I will add to this debate though is that I've seen a lot of people go for Virgil van Dijk over Robertson. I understand that if you think that Robertson will be benched, but even under the new system, I still believe Robertson will get forward, and that's why I do prefer him over Van Dijk. So hopefully we do get some early Liverpool news or some suggested lineups that tell us that Robertson will play, but because this is quite an easy game at home, we could see Tsimikas start. But in terms of Gakpo, there's so much rotation that could happen in that front line. Darwin Núñez is back to full fitness. We have Luis Diaz that might get some minutes off the bench. A Firmino that could also start as well. But I do think Gakpo should start the game and hopefully get the majority of minutes. I should remind you guys as well that Game Week 33 is a midweek game week, so there could be some rotation or some early minutes for some of these options. But to kind of conclude, I think right now, I do like the upside of the Liverpool attack slightly more. Yes, the team structure might be slightly better with going for a double up in that Liverpool defense, but I just believe that Gakpo might be worth going for that risk. You guys can leave in the comments down below, are you going for Van Dijk, are you going for Robertson, are you going for Jota, Gakpo? Who's your Liverpool triple up going to be alongside Trent and Salah? Now another big talking point about the free hit is what differentials should you guys be looking for. And the first thing I want to say is that the free hit is differential enough. I've seen so many people over on Twitter and overall in the FPL community saying that everyone's team looks the same. But when you guys see these ownerships, you'll understand that the teams aren't the same. It's just a very small sample size. So what I'll be doing here is I'll be going over the defenders, the midfielders, and the forwards, going through my top 3 differentials that you guys should be looking at. I've excluded the goalkeepers because their upside isn't that high, and I believe all of us are probably going to go for Johnston anyways. Then the last thing to add is that this is going to be ownership within the top 100k. I decided to go for the top 100k as it's slightly more kind of relevant, but the top 10k should be pretty similar. So going over the first defender to look at, and I'm going to be going for Virgil van Dijk. Now Robertson is very lowly owned as well. I think he's owned by about 1.8%, but Van Dijk is slightly more differential, and that's why I've selected him. Now I mentioned this in the previous talking point, but between Van Dijk and Robertson, it's super close. It's a very 50-50 call. I like Van Dijk off those set pieces, but in terms of open play, obviously Robertson's better, playing as a fullback. But because it's so close in my opinion, I don't really mind going for either of them, and that's why Van Dijk at a ridiculous 1.21% ownership might be a mega differential. Now my second option is going to come from a defense that I think should probably do quite well in blank game week 32, and it's the Crystal Palace one. Now between Gay and Anderson, it's quite close, but Anderson definitely more differential at 0.22%. Now yes, the upside might not be there from a defensive point of view. Don't think Anderson or Gay are going to be getting that forward. But as mentioned, if you guys are going for a Gakpo or a Jota, they do provide some nice defensive stability in the backline. Added to that, they're super cheap, but money isn't really a problem, as you guys would have seen on those free hit drafts. The last option to go for is going to be an option that offers that attacking threat, maybe not the most defensive threat, has a little bit of a tougher game in game week 32. It's Alex Moreno from Aston Villa. Now that game against Brentford, I do expect Brentford to score probably, and that's why Moreno, I don't really like him as a defensive option, as you don't want to have to rely on attacking threat from your defenders. But saying that though, Aston Villa have been defending better at the current moment, so there could be a chance of a clean sheet for the 3.15% owned Alex Moreno. But if you want the more popular options on a free hit, if you guys are going for the double up in the Liverpool attack, and that's why I wanted to put him here as a suggestion. Now obviously there are other defenders to look at, there's so many options or teams that could keep clean sheets, but these 3 are the teams I would favor, but you guys can also change from their respective teams. Now going on to the midfield department, and the first option is going to be from Crystal Palace. Now between Elise or Eze, you guys can go for either of them, the stats are super close. I just prefer Eze at the current moment, as it seems like he's getting slightly more forward. But both of them are pretty lowly owned, but Eze is definitely more differential at 1.27%. Now Crystal Palace, we just saw that Everton have the worst XG conceded over the last 6 games at a minimum. Crystal Palace are playing a lot better under Roy Hodgson, so there could be goals in this one. Now in terms of my prediction, I might not say it's going to be the highest scoring game, and that's why I might be put off going for an Eze or an Elise, but I guess they only need to get you one attacking return at their cheap price point. Then next up is a bit of a cheat here because I've already spoken about Gakpo, but I'm going to select him here and show you guys his ownership of 2.27%. So the Liverpool triple up is super differential whether you guys go for any of the Liverpool attackers, but I do really like Gakpo, as I think he's more nailed in that starting front 3. He is also slightly out of position playing as a centre forward in that Liverpool attack, so what's there not to like? Now my last option is going to be Willian from Fulham. Now between Andreas Pereira and Willian, it's quite close between the stats, but obviously Willian's slightly more differential at a ridiculous 0.02%. So mega differential if you guys do want to go for him, has a lovely fixture against Leeds, just conceded a few to Liverpool on the weekend. The defense is in shambles at the moment, and Fulham are still looking pretty strong without Mitrovic. But if you guys do want to go for Andres Pereira 100%, just be reminded that he's slightly more owned. Now the midfield options that you guys can also look at, there's so many this week. You could look at a Billing from Bournemouth. He has some pretty good stats at the moment, Bournemouth playing well. You have a player like a Maddison who could also be differential amongst your rank, but these three teams on paper have that upside potential. Now finally, going over our forward line, and the first player is going to be from a team that I would love to be differential. It's going to be the Arsenal assets with Gabriel Jesus at 1.57%. So if Jesus does start, and we should get some early team news on Arsenal coming up on Friday evening, if he does start, I really do like him at that centre forward position in a high-flying Arsenal side from an attacking point of view. Now yes, the results might not be there from an Arsenal point of view, but every game matters for them in this title race, especially with Man City coming up in the midweek. So if you don't want to drop points the game week before you face your rivals, and Jesus has been putting up some pretty good stats at the moment. Then we have Solanke, a player that's also returning a few points over the last couple game weeks at 1.25%. I was expecting his ownership to be a lot higher within the top 100k, and that's exactly the fact I was talking about. Go look at the ownership stats, not necessarily going on FPL Twitter because everyone kind of owns Solanke in their drafts, but still super differential at the moment. Now I just want to add you that these are obviously stats from game week 31, so on the free hit, their ownership will probably be a lot higher, but just remember that not everyone's using their free hit this week. And the final options be another Liverpool asset. You guys will see that any kind of Liverpool Arsenal players that are differential might be worth it, and definitely have that upside with their fixtures. Small options can be Diego Jota at 0.01%, so the lowest owned option in terms of our players, so super differential at the moment. Now my only problem with Jota is because of those forward positions being so kind of contentious, there's massive competition between them, and that's why with Jota, don't know if he's worth playing him in that forward position. When you have a player like a Gakpo in midfield or going for a double up in the defense, they might be slightly more worth it and give you a better overall team structure. But a massive punt to go for, so you guys want a mega differential, go for Jota. Could even be a captaincy shout if he does start. Now amongst the other forwards, there are some other options I like. A Vinicius is ridiculously low owned with a great fixture against Leeds. But these are my favorite. You guys can comment down below your favorite differentials from a defender, a midfielder, and a forward point of view. If there's any I missed, make sure that you guys do remind me, as I could even want them in my own FPL draft. Now the final talking point to go over, as we always do in these ultimate guides, is going to be all about captaincy, and unfortunately this week I think the majority of people will captain Mo Salah. So the Egyptian has Nottingham Forest at home, great fixture on paper, scored a few against Leeds on the weekend, so the confidence is going to be there, and Liverpool always play better at home. So for me it's a no-brainer. If you guys do want to go differential though, there are a few other assets, starting off with Martinelli against Southampton at home. So Martinelli at the current moment is my favorite Arsenal attacker to get, was one of the players that's locked in on my free hit at the current moment, obviously as long as he starts. Some early team news will be given probably for Arsenal, so there is the chance of him being benched, so just watch out for that. Added to that is the early kickoff, so if you guys do want to go for the early kickoff captain, just be reminded about what Gundy says, never back the early kickoff. But if you guys did back Ollie Watkins on the weekend, the high scoring player basically in game week 31, so that quote isn't always right. Now if you guys do want to go for a Saka, an Odegaard, that sort of thing, 100% fine, even a Jesus might be a shout. Then my final differential captain, and the reason I've gone for Solanke is because there's so many other options here. You literally can go for any other captain. If you want to go Harry Kane against Newcastle, you could do that. If you want to go Ivan Toney against Aston Villa, it's also a shout. Ollie Watkins even against a Brentford side that do like to concede, could even be one, but I wanted to go mega differential here, and West Ham still have some European football coming up. That's kind of the reason I did go for Solanke, because I think that West Ham should probably be tired, and they might rotate quite heavily against Bournemouth on the weekend. But as mentioned, Solanke definitely an outside punt, a mega differential. Any other option could also suffice, but I generally think most people go for Mo Salah. That being said, if you guys also want to go differential, you could still stick with that fixture, go for a Gakpo, go for a Jota, a Trent even. You guys are still getting that good fixture, but I'm just betting that your option scores more than Mo Salah. That could be a shout, but I think the majority of the effective ownership will be on Mo Salah's hands, so please understand that risk. Now if there are any other talking points you guys want me to cover, drop them in the comments down below on my Discord server, and hopefully I do answer them in the team selection coming up tomorrow. But this is basically wrap 3 guys. Hope you did enjoy it. Please like if you didn't subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. I'll be seeing you guys as mentioned for the team selection tomorrow. Otherwise on the deadline stream coming up 1 hour before the deadline on Friday evening, wherever you guys are around the world. But I'm me signing off. It's been Dayvy FPL and I'm out. Cheers, bye.